for and actually have virtually no overlap with the previous three presentations is really something. Actually, a couple of comments. When HPA did the 32 sequence test reels on the interrelation between high dynamic range, resolution, and frame rate, one of the things that came out was that the higher the resolution, the more it hurts motion blur. And it was interesting, they actually showed scenes that looked much crisper with motion, where they actually reduced it to HD while the pan was happening. One of the things that I've noticed on the 8K demonstrations I've seen is the motion blur is abhorrent. And it looks like we're almost back to early tube days. But it's now
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
And I was struck by Manny's presentation that I don't think, as the commercial animal here, I didn't think you talked about anything costing over $1,000.
Nope.
I found that was one of the things I noticed about this year's NAB, which, those of you who don't know my background, the company I run was started in 1958, the same month I was born. So I've literally been going to NAB since the 70s. In fact, people will ask me how many NABs you've been to, and my answer is I don't know, but certainly 30-something. And this is 33 years full-time, and this was the most profound NAB from both what the customer side was talking about and the technology side by far. And I'm already certain that next year, I'll also say next year's will be the most profound NAB I can ever remember. One of the comments I had was that with all the emphasis on drones and a lot of inexpensive technologies, I almost had to go out and look at the front of the building and make sure I was at NAB and not the Consumer Electronics Show. And a lot of the vendors noticed that there's a new term, and I apologize to anybody who goes around a trade show with a backpack, but they talked about the backpackers. And when you saw a lot of the people, they just didn't frankly look like broadcasters. I know we all don't dress up anymore and whatnot, but I got a real sense there was a lot of people not from the broadcast industry just attending NAB. So, without further ado, I just took a few pictures. And of course, yes, everywhere I went, I found a drone. So I just click ahead and I'll try to go through quite quickly. So some general observations. The show attendance was actually shown that was up the third year in a row. Last year was 98,000. They're actually claiming it's over 100,000. And they'll update a final number over the next few weeks. Interesting also that Tuesday seemed to be the busiest day. We always used to the Monday crush in the South Hall especially, but for some reason Monday seemed light both this year and last year. The South Lower Hall was definitely the busiest space all throughout the entire show. It just seems that that's just the most crowded area for booths. One of my big pet peeves, and I dread what's going to happen when they expand, the hall is being expanded, the convention center is being expanded. And how many people know that the South Hall, the bravado of the South Hall is a mile long? If you walk in the front door and out the back door, you've traveled a mile. But anyways, the annoyance of the layout, when we have meetings on the show floor, a lot of the people have just smartened up basically and said, you know what, if your vendor's in the South Lower Hall, that's Monday's our South Lower day and that'll be it. So the whole idea of trying to schedule meetings and run back and forth around the hall, they could easily get rid of the North Hall and collapse into the rest of the show, but they insist on the bravado of filling up the whole show. I've just sort of taken a big picture view rather than talk about, it was interesting when you were just talking, Brian, when I actually asked people what they were there to look for, the two most common topics I got from the Canadian client base was closed captioning and transcoding. Those familiar, not 4K or anything like that. Yes, 4K was there. I went around and how many people saw a 4K display at the show? To my knowledge, there was no 4K display at the show. There was UHD displays, and I got bored. I got bored of going around pissing people off on the first day because they had a big 4K sign. Ikegami had a big LED screen, and the guy says, I said, that's not 4K, that's not 17 by 9. And he goes, yeah, it's 4K. And finally I take his brochure and it's at 3840. So
thank you.
Talk about a stickler. Oh.
Same thing when you saw attempts at high dynamic range until the quantum dot technology. I mean, I've seen at SMPTE, I've seen a few very close to full high dynamic range displays, and you have to view it. They're very small, you have to view them in the dark, and you can actually, to me, real high dynamic range in UHD looks more 3D than 3D ever hoped it could. But the problem is, other than the dozen or so laser projectors that Christie and Barco make, I don't think there's actually any display on Earth where you can actually see high dynamic range. But anyways, amongst the confusion of that, virtualization, OTT, and IP, I think the worst three acronyms created in recent memory of our business is IP, OTT, and cloud. I hate those terms. Everybody's talking about them in a different context.
Here, Paul.
And anyways, I'll debunk a little bit about what those three things mean. Drones were everywhere. One thing that really was almost a sad day, other than the Gates Air booth. Remember when the North Hall was the radio hall and all the RF? There was virtually no RF at this show. I mean, maybe a 20th of what was there 10 years ago even. That business has it really spoke to the direction of the industry. Carry on. Just got some general pictures. Obviously, this is a South Lower Hall. This will prove actually how bad a camera is in a BlackBerry. So some of the footprint, it was interesting too, as you saw the drone pavilion, the drone places, the people selling little knickknacks. You really get a sense of how the fundamental broadcast suppliers, how the footprint of them has shrunk. In fact, some of you heard me bemoan the sponsorship for the Canadian suite being harder and harder. Well, once upon a time we used to get Belden to sponsor, Miranda to sponsor, and Grass Valley to sponsor, and guess what? There they are, one booth and in one spot. So this area in front of the Blackmagic booth, I think Blackmagic is the new red. Everybody's crowded around it. So, carry on. This was really funny. I go to the red camera booth, they've got 6K motion and a morgue scene. and I went over and I said, that's funny, did you guys mean to do that? He said, well, no, I guess we just wanted color and something catchy, and okay, you're showing 6K motion, said fake dead people. So. The Sony booth, I've always been curious to Sony, where they seem to locate back at the Central Hall. One of the aspects of the IP is 10 gig IP and 10 gig Ethernet, and the competition between Sony's proprietary format for production and TICO, the J2000 based mild compression. A lot of people, I'm one of them, think that those will go away as 25 or 40 gig switches replace 10 gig pretty much at the same price. But that was probably the biggest thing I heard out of the Sony camp was a production format that, unlike the current state of 2022, allows you to change the bank and audio. And we've got one of the 2022, actually two people who sit on the committee. I believe you said as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment to the Sony IP Live and the TICO.
Yep.
They have formed two alliances, so there are companies that have joined up, and they're both writing RDD, SMPTE registered disclosure documents to help the interop across everything.
Oh, okay.
So if you guys have heard of Dolby E, that's like an RDD.
Yep.
So it's a technology that's kind of coming, but they are proprietary, yeah, but at the same time they are trying to move it toward interop across.
Yeah, I just thought it was a bit late in the game for anything proprietary to be coming from any of the established broadcasters, but I get it, yeah. Yeah, again, this is, I basically put this here sort of to basically mock it. I have seen in dark rooms proper high dynamic range with regular full dynamic range HD, and you could see a slight difference. But again, until I think the quantum dot technology is further developed and other things with absolute black backlights and things, I didn't really see any particularly good high dynamic range demos. I don't know if anybody else, which is too bad because it's definitely, it is the best bang for the bits, as the HPA studies have also shown. GoPro, one of the most successful IPOs in stock market history last year. Everything's got a GoPro. It's amazing how many stadiums now actually have, we're doing a fair bit of stadium business these days. It's amazing how many stadiums will admit to having GoPros for POV cameras that actually get cut to air. So the GoPro is long since stopped becoming a toy. Karen? Avid, obviously touting their concept of interoperability. And these are just general pictures around the show. Karen? Dolby, very, very active in the standards process these days, making more noises about getting more active. I think if Dolby can figure out a way to patent high dynamic range and sell it to us as a proprietary standard, they will. Other than that, they'll just have to bug us with all the, actually a good friend of mine on the SMPTE board is from Dolby. But, Karen? Yes, real changing times. Hitachi, Oracle, EMC, now very much a part of the mainstay infrastructure of the industry now. So, Deluxe was interesting. What I thought was interesting about the Deluxe booth was A, there was a booth for Deluxe, and B, they've really changed themselves into a services company. So I thought it was interesting that they're really they're showing a lot of legacy migration services, various metadata enrichment tools. But they're very much transitioning from their core post-production business into a service offering. Harmonic, interesting, never a lot of activity around a lot of the telco booths, but again, the changing face of NAB, a lot less footprint devoted to traditional broadcast suppliers. So this is over in the North Hall, which I say shouldn't exist, but the key players here, just leaf forward on the pictures, obviously the Imagine booth, Evertz and Ross. Three great Canadian companies. We're all located in the north. Okay. Yeah, again, this lonely looking sign over a few cars with bad, I walked over to the cars and I thought, oh, is this HD radio? No, it's just a couple of cars. Some mumble, you know, to me this was really, really lame and really spoke to the fact that the National Association of Broadcasters is really turning into the National Association of Multimedia Providers, and radio and RF are really just almost gone from the show. Here, this is one of the biggest crowds I saw, and of course this was the daily free giveaway of a drone. So drones, carry on, drones with the 3D thing, and still more drones. I think this was the biggest drone. I was going to make a joke about droning on. And again, one thing that really bothered me is this is in the South Upper. There was just a lot of empty spaces at the show, and I lament NAB's choice to consume the whole hall and then make us run from the north to the south, and then stick all this empty space around. So if you just carry around and just. For example, in one empty space, they put an arcade. You could go in and shoot a game of pool and play air hockey and pinball. But to me, it was, you know, okay, it was kind of cute, but it was kind of dumb, and just more empty spaces. Obviously, Cisco making noises about a more significant role in the industry. Cloud. So this is a confused term. I mean, I think last year everybody was painting quickly trying to paint. There was actually some substance to it though this year. Versus last year, people were just trying to paint clouds on their booth to look frenzy. It's a confused term. To some, it means an outsourced service, and I don't believe that with 70% of our business now owned by telcos, that any of those telcos are going to outsource any type of IT service anytime soon. So I think it's hooey. And I hear some. I would say 10% of the people I deal with in the industry have some attention to. Some interest in outsource, but for the most part, I think everybody's looking to virtualize the processor application. There is nothing we can't do in software now. Obviously, editing, audio boards can be 100% software, production switchers can be software, obviously the servers can be software. I'll talk a little bit about software-based playout systems, and of course, most of the playout systems have gone to being software applications running on generic hardware versus. So we really are seeing the beginnings of and a migration away from device-based software licenses to floating licenses, particularly in the transcoding. It also brings up the whole issue of blades, and found myself explaining sort of the origin of blade when IBM made those first boards so heavy they had to be stood on their edge to keep from sagging. But really, blade technology is a centralized pool of resources. So I think where we're headed in the industry now are virtualized software licenses, and you'll be able to spin up, say, 20 channels of a certain type of transcoder, take those down, spin up a different type of transcoder. I think that's the multimedia movement, or the broadcast business urgency to catch up with it, takes us more into a blade environment of centralized resources. And for instance, this is Imagine's cloud channel system. There was a big announcement by Disney. Well, I didn't realize that more than 60% of Disney's net revenues are actually from television, not Mickey Mouse, not movies. And they've committed to this technology over the next 3 years. OTT, again, I hate, this is probably, of the acronyms I hate, this is the one I most hate. To me, this describes the problem. So in television, we built SDI plants, and suddenly fewer and fewer people are watching traditional linear television, and we need to get to the other eyeballs watching other devices. So we've created these over-the-top workflows. We've created these additional workflows to go around our SDI, because SDI only does video. And so we've had to create, spring up these different workflows for every form of distribution. What I hear from the industry is that you've got an industry that's probably lost half its engineering staff in some places. You've got an average broadcaster going from maybe doing 8 to 12 different platforms now. And the numbers I hear throughout the industry is eventually you have to produce 30 to 40 different forms of consumption. So what we foresee is a goal of a single workflow that creates all versions from a single master file format over an IT network. So if we can now start to move SDI over IP, well, we know everything else can go over an IT/IP network. So it's the way to harmonize the workflows. And I don't think, I very much, in a lot of the whisper sessions that I go to on Saturday and Sunday, I've very much heard nobody's disagreeing with this trend. There's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of discussion about the pace of the trend, whether it's 3 or 5 years, or whether or not it's going to be proprietary or COTS. I think one of the most important technologies that was not touted much at the show, because it's a free and open SMPTE standard, and NAB is a commercial show, was SMPTE IMF. When IMF, when the keynote, Netflix fellow did the keynote at the SMPTE fall conference, he more or less came out and said Netflix will completely adopt IMF. Disney, of course, lent people to author it over the last 5 years. They're entirely converted. Disney claims to produce up to 35,000 versions of some pieces of content. So IMF, if we're going to create a unified network that's going to carry all forms of media without discriminating, then something like an IMF master file format to be the single version creating all the subversions is going to become important to undoing OTT and integrating it. One of the other things that came out was realistically, we all wasted our time going to 3 gig SDI. There's virtually no discussion about 1080p 60, and even the links, the multiple links used for UHD are, anyways. Yeah, so substantial confusion over the use of the term IP. It's probably not a particularly good acronym, just the Internet Protocol side of it. Many will talk about it in the vein of the transmission side. And of course, most broadcasters in Canada are all interconnected on some IP-based transmission system using J2K or something, or uncompressed. So there's a considerable amount of discussion about remote production, some saying that we're on the dawn of the end of the big mobile, and a lot of interest in lighter, faster production. I hear a lot of it in the industry, people talk about ESPN3. They're not necessarily talking about ESPN3, they're talking about the whole genre of being able to go out and do smaller type. Pac-10 women's volleyball, for example, was being done in remote production. So a lot of discussion about that in the idea of IP in the vein of remote production. And I had dinner with quite a few of you at NAB, and you all heard me give this speech. I basically said we've got 3 camps right now when it comes to IP. You've got the Flat Earth Society, as I call it, people who believe SDI is good, SDI will be here forever. I went looking for 12 gig SDI, because there were 2 pieces of 12 gig SDI last year. Did anybody see any 12 gig SDI?
Black Magic.
Yeah, that was the only place we saw it last year.
Well, the
We had
denim-
No, this year
the
they,
Okay.
they
Well,
dumped,
Oh, now they're
We had it
fighting.
on our booth too.
Okay,
We had a router.
okay. So, anyways, but obviously there's relatively little interest in amongst the industry now to go out and redo the infrastructure of SDI to 12 gig. Then you've got your proprietary, okay, I'll pick on by name primarily the Everts Camp, that have deliverable off-the-shelf IP networks, but they are mostly a proprietary type system. And then you've got the COTS, common off-the-shelf or consumer off-the-shelf software-defined networks, and that was more or less the Imagine story, and commonly available IT infrastructure. So this is, again, I've taken this from the Imagine booth and down-resed it for the purposes of this, but this is, I thought, a really good screenshot showing how a software-defined network can be created. At 40 gig E, the estimate is that 96% of the cabling in a typical control room goes away. So, and that was actually a number given by Belden, so I thought that was really interesting for the cable company. And they made the same joke, they said, well, that's what's gonna happen. So a lot of talk about the arrival of either 25 or 40 gig, which will actually make the use of software-defined networks quite a bit more practical. And the other thing about it is that picture shows is your cabling isn't necessarily point-to-point at that point. So now we have cables going from this place to that place and going through a router if we need to change the direction. But once you build an IT infrastructure, suddenly you can create whole different workflows with presumably the click of a mouse. Again, demonstrating how bad a BlackBerry camera is, showing software-defined workflows.
So that's 3D.
And the Everts, again, showing their deliverable system, often talk about their ESPN reference.
Yeah.
And somebody wins a drone. Let's cheer that one up. Anyways, that's my short overview of NAB.
all right.